No matter your age, your plan for retirement can start today. From the News Channel 5 network, this is the Retirement Report.
Good morning. Welcome to the Retirement Report. I'm Hank Parrott, your host. We're going to be talking about estate planning today. There's been a number of different legislations that have passed, but the one that we're mainly going to focus in on as a part of, we're going to first talk about some basics of estate planning, and then the Secure Act, which was passed at the end of 2019, and the impact that's had with regard to estate planning. So we'll get into some advanced strategies as well, in particular when it comes to the impact of the Secure Act. So lots to talk about today on estate planning. This is one you really want to pay attention as far as these new rules. If you have basically with the change in 2019 and the impact on 2020 and beyond, that means if you had your estate planning documents done up prior to 2020, this is something you want to pay attention to what you're going to do to maybe make some amendments or changes to that estate plan. It certainly at least requires a review with your estate planning attorney. And helping us with that is one of the best estate planning attorneys around, Russ Cook with Russ Cook and Associates over in Brentwood, Tennessee. Russ is a board-certified estate planning attorney. We've been working together for, gosh, I think close to 20 years now, 15 to 20 anyway. And lots of mutual clients. Very happy with the work Russ does. And this is one of the things, having worked together for so long, we've had some clients that have passed that Russ has done their documents, has done their estate planning for, and seeing on the other end when we're administering that, when we're seeing the impact for the family, that in fact all their goals were in fact accomplished. And this is one of the important, if you're going to do the planning, if you're going to take the time, you want to do it right. And Russ, you're a good one for doing it right. And some of the basics in my book, 7 Steps to Financial Freedom and Retirement, I talk about the 5 essential documents that form the foundation of a good estate plan. And Russ, those 5 documents, we're talking about, of course, a revocable living trust, pour-over will, powers of attorney for assets and health care, and a living will. So you do, of course, estate planning mostly with regard to trust, right?
Yeah, that's true. We find that trusts are a very useful tool in estate planning. What they do, starting with the revocable living trust, it allows us to transition assets at death without going through a formal court administrative proceeding, provided it's properly set up. Yep. And that's one of the keys when you do have a revocable trust as part of your estate planning, that you make sure that you fund it. And so that's something that we keep emphasizing with our clients. And I know, Hank, you're very good at making sure that your clients have their revocable trusts funded. This
is one of those areas, right? I mean, one of the benefits of a trust is to avoid probate. And of course, if you don't fund it, though, if you don't take the time to do the necessary transfers and retitling needed on assets, then of course you're going to go through probate and miss out on one of the benefits anyway. Of course, there are a number of other benefits with regard to trust. And one of the things I talk about is that of not just what happens when you die. And a lot of times we postpone, right? We just don't want to think of that we're dying. We don't want to think of when we're gone sometimes. And so we can tend to procrastinate. There's plenty of time to get to that. And hopefully that's the case. But it's a good idea to get it handled, the peace of mind that comes with that. And estate planning is not just for what happens when you're gone, but also what happens when you're living. And Russ, you probably deal with people coming in and having to deal with, applying to get a conservatorship, for instance.
Yeah, those are situations that you want to make sure that you've planned in advance for, because a conservatorship, that's the process in which if someone in your family is disabled, you have to go to court in order to get appointed as their conservator, both over the property that they own and their person. And we try to avoid requiring our clients to do that in those situations by the documents that we prepare. The revocable trust is a very good tool for avoiding a conservatorship over property, because you have a trust in place already. So if the trustee and beneficiary, who is usually the one that sets up the trust, becomes incapacitated, you have a successor trustee that steps in to manage those assets. Now you can do the same through a power of attorney, but we found that when dealing with banks, especially with power of attorney in banks, they're very reluctant sometimes to take certain power of attorneys, and it's not that they're bad, it's just that some banks like their own.
Right.
But if those assets are already in a revocable trust, we found that the transition of control from the person who's incapacitated to the successor trustee is a much smoother process. And then you couple that with a power of attorney for health care and living will, so that you have documents in place, you're appointing someone to make decisions over the person, over you, and making your health care decisions when you can't do it for yourself.
Well, and it's a good point, and I've run into it in the past, and sometimes the banks are, you may have one that seems a little dated to them, and they're concerned, might there be another power of attorney out there that was done subsequent, and their liability issues that they worry about. They don't want to necessarily honor that power of attorney and then come to find there's someone else out there that maybe got a power of attorney later that superseded that one, and the banks all of a sudden maybe have some liability. So their concerns are legitimate, I suppose, but the other piece that comes into play with the trust, as you said, Russ, is there's not going to be another one of those out there. The account is in the trust. They have already a copy of either a memorandum or certificate of trust telling them who they're going to be doing business with in some life event such as incapacity. So it's a much stronger way to get things handled. Now, you also, Russ, deal with people coming in and talking to you about the difference between a will and a trust and how, which one might be better for them. What are some of the pros, let's say, besides what we just talked about with regard to a trust over a will?
Well, the benefit of a trust is that it allows you to transition assets and not disclose who is receiving those assets in a court proceeding. In other words, when you have a will, you have to file the will in the probate court in order for the will to be considered effective. With a trust, since you're not filing it in the probate court, you don't have third parties that can go in and figure out exactly who you're giving your estate to, and depending on the county, how much assets you have. So for those clients that want to keep that information close to the vest, certainly a revocable trust is a better option. The next benefit is, of course, not having to go through probate in different states. We have clients that have assets in Tennessee, and they may own a piece of real property in Florida or some other state, and whenever you have a will, you have to probate the will in the state where you live and also in the state where your property is located. So by having a revocable trust and deed those assets into the trust, you're not having to go through probate in all those various states that you might have real estate. So that's another benefit. And then when it comes to retirement account planning, sometimes it's easier to name beneficiary designations through a revocable trust than through a will. And we can get into that in a minute when we get into the Secure Act, but that is one of the, I guess, up and coming benefits that we're seeing with trusts. And then finally, for married couples, you have what's called a community property trust, which allows us an income tax benefit. What it does is it gives us a full step up in cost basis on assets that are in the trust when the first spouse dies. So if you bought a stock for $10, it's worth $20 when you pass, your wife wants to sell it, she'll pay no capital gains tax if she sells it for $20. Otherwise, she'd have to pay capital gains tax on her half share if it were held in a joint account. So that's a huge benefit for clients, married clients who have capital gain assets.
Yeah, exactly. Whether you're talking about stock mutual funds, or of course real estate. And if they have a number of rental properties, this is an area that could be especially helpful when the first passes for that surviving spouse to have more flexibility, at least as far as liquidating some assets for needed cash or additional income that may be needed at that time. Or if they've got an asset that maybe is not as, rental properties that aren't performing quite as well, or just the getting up there and it's like, the work and time it goes into taking care of those properties. It may come at a point where that would be, especially as getting older, where they would be able to, again, have the flexibility to liquidate without any big tax consequences. So a great one to look into. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to deal more, we'll talk again about some of the basics, the foundations, and then we're going to get into the Secure Act and the effect that is having on estate planning. In particular, this is one they really want to pay attention to. The goal here is understanding how it works and how to make sure that the IRS isn't your biggest beneficiary when it comes to your estate, but it stays as much as we can, of course, in the family. So, but first a break. Join me here. We'll be right back on the Retirement Report.
This is a Storm 5 weather update. For weather on the go, download the Storm Shield app.
Hi everyone, I'm Storm 5 Senior Meteorologist Leland Statham on a